Memories of a Madwoman, just like the title, presented by Susan Weeks. Some of us have been blessed with loving mothers who nurtured and supported us throughout our lives. Others of us have not been so fortunate. Yet we can all celebrate Mother's Day in our own unique way. Susan Weeks shares her personal experience and offers insights into what makes this day so special. No matter the circumstances of our backgrounds, we have been given the gift of life, and for that, we can truly be thankful. Originally from the San Francisco Bay Area, Susan has led a nomadic life. Mexico is her 8th country of residence, with numerous professions, including administrator, editor, international tour director, and spiritual leader, and varied scholastic interests. Susan is a licensed Unity teacher, pursuing an ordination as an interfaith minister. Please welcome Susan Weeks.
Good morning. Good morning. It is such a gorgeous day, and isn't it wonderful that for many of us, it's Mother's Day. The title of the talk is Memories of a Madwoman. Some of you know that my mother was truly mentally ill. Adam Sandler said, "I was raised by a mother who told me how great I was every day of my life." What a marvelous thing. My personal experience wasn't that way at all. In fact, I remember almost nothing of my mother. The memories I do have of her, it wasn't her face, it was her back. Although she raised me from birth until I was 16 and was no longer living at home. But I remember almost nothing of her. A friend of mine emailed me the other day. He met her in 1972. And he said, "I remember her really quite well because she was very polite, but she wasn't very warm. She seemed to hold everything back. She wasn't effusive. She was just polite." And that's true about my mother in general. She had isolated herself from her family by the time I could remember. It was 7. She had no real friends ever. When she transitioned, she was teaching in the Philippines in 1986. And I went down there. She had been there for 2 years. And no one really knew her. That's what her coworkers said. She was an excellent teacher, but no one really knew her at all. As soon as I was asked to do this talk, Margaret Van Every sent me an email and said, "We're so looking forward to your spin about Mother's Day." And the truth is, I celebrate it as a very special day. Is it about my mother in particular? No, it's not. It's about anyone who has nurtured. I looked up the definition of mother. I was just curious what the dictionaries would say. And I found a number of things. Having given birth to, you're a mother. And then it goes on to the things that I think are most important. Loving, caring, nurturing. So, with my mother, I can say, mother, gave birth to. Check. Loving. Give that a miss. Caring. Nah. Nurturing. I don't think so. What I remember of her most personally is her criticism. I can remember her giving me one compliment. I was 23 years old. I had a daughter. She was just a toddler. But she said, "Susan, you always manage to make a place feel like a home." Thanks. One compliment. I can remember her hugging me and holding me, cradling me and rocking me one time. I would have been 5 or 6. That's it. That is it. I, on the other hand, am practically the opposite of her, which is also grounds for criticism. But let's go back. I was born in 1943. My father enlisted in the Army in 1943. They divorced in 1949, but she always claimed that he had enlisted in 1943 because I was born, and he didn't want responsibility. Nothing could have been further from the truth, but I didn't find that out until I was 19 or so, when I got to know my father for the first time, really. In 1947, he was by then a second lieutenant, and we lived in a little town called Göppingen, which is near Stuttgart. We had a very large house. It was really a mansion. We had a housekeeper. The house had been lived in by a former toy train manufacturer. He and his family had been evicted after the war because, unfortunately, the Nazis had taken over the factory. So it was being used for the war effort, although it had been a toy train manufacturing company. And my mother told me once, as I was an adult, that the woman who owned the house came to visit one day. It was a big house. It had a gated driveway, for instance, that I remember well because I caught my knee in it. I caught my knee in the gate. But a woman came to the door and said, "Could I please look at my house?" Guess what my mother said? No. This is not a woman who demonstrated compassion. This is not a woman who modeled any behavior that I find important or that I demonstrate. Henry Stowe Beecher said at one point, "Your mother is your classroom." And perhaps that's why I don't remember much about her. I truly don't. I remember the house in 1947. I remember the housekeeper, Emily. I remember her granddaughter, Heidi. I remember the smell of fresh baking bread in the oven that she would make. I remember going to her house, and little Heidi and I would go out to the chicken coop and gather eggs. I remember that. I remember the smells, the textures. I don't remember my mother, except for playing Chopin on the piano. And it was her back that I saw. I remember nothing. We ended up, when we left Germany, my mother and I, my father stayed there, but she ended up graduating from Stanford in 1949, the same year she divorced my father. And we got to live with my grandfather. My grandfather was truly my nurturer. And he was quite elderly. He married late in life. He was born in 1865. He ended up being a gold prospector in the Klondike in the gold rush of 1898. And he stayed up there until, the early 1930s. By that time, his wife had divorced him. They had 2 children. So he had built her a large house. He built himself a small house, kitty corner, so that he could still be in touch with his children. And my grandfather was 77 when I was born. But how I remember him. He was magnificent. He was first-generation immigrant. His family came from Swiss. They were Swiss Germans. But I remember him so vividly. I remember that I would have been 5½, perhaps at the time. But if I dawdled, that was one of his favorite words. If I dawdled at dinner, I had to do the dishes. And I only had to do it one time, but I remember standing in the kitchen on a chair, doing the dishes, tears streaming down my face. But I did the dishes, and I never dawdled again. I remember the Christmas, and his Christmas tree was always with great big blue lights. The Christmas he gave me a bicycle. Only it wasn't from him. It was absolutely, positively from Santa Claus. And how did I know that? Well, because I heard the jingle bells outside the back door. Because when I got out there and saw this shiny new bicycle, it was so cold, it had to have come from the North Pole. In the meantime, my grandfather had gone around to the front of the house, so that by the time I came in with this great news about this fabulous bicycle, he was back there and I could share it with him. And he brought the bicycle in that very night and helped me navigate the narrow hallways of this small house. But he had me on the bicycle. And the next day, Christmas Day, by gosh, he was out there. He would have been, what, 83. He had me on the street and said, you can ride this bicycle. No training wheels, no nothing. Spent about 15 minutes with me, and off I went. He was magnificent. When I was 10 and 11, those summers, I got to spend a lot of time with him. When I was 10, he bought this gigantic guitar, just in case I wanted to learn how to play the guitar. A year later, he bought this humongous television set. And remember how huge they were back in the 1950s, early 1950s? I mean, if you had a television, they were gigantic, tiny screens, but they were gigantic. He bought a piano in case I wanted to play the piano. And he taught me the 3 C's. The 3 C's are chess, checkers, and canasta. Bless his heart. He used to brag. He said, well, Susan isn't very good at checkers and chess, but she can beat the pants off me in canasta. And I just adored him. Unfortunately, he passed when I was 12. And I remember being there at the funeral, looking down at him, and feeling completely alone. Completely alone. But by gosh, in the time he was with me, he gave me so much. I was asked recently where I get my spirit, my lightness, my enthusiasm. And I may be shaking, but I appear confident. Where did that come from? It came from my grandfather. No one else. Now, I remember vividly my experience of myself and my life at the ages of 4, 5, and 6. Mind you, with no recollection of my mother. She was there. I was the one in preschool and kindergarten who welcomed the newcomers, who gave them a little orientation, who made them feel welcome, who helped teach them how to tie their shoelaces, who took care of their hurts. And the best thing ever, we got grilled cheese sandwiches back then with cheese that when it was melted, you could stretch. So the whole thing was to take a bite of the sandwich and then pull the sandwich out as far as you could and have the cheese still connected. It was a delight to do all that. That changed radically when my mother graduated from Stanford. We moved to San Francisco, and for the next number of years lived in a series of boarding houses, residence clubs, a hotel. I had chicken pox at the hotel. The hotel was really great because it was right across the street from a piano store that also brought in a television. So I'd wander around the piano store, listen to them demonstrating the pianos, which I loved, take a sneak peek every once in a while at the television set. But it was grand. I was also a latchkey kid by the age of 7. Extremely responsible. Now 7 is significant because I was early into the first grade, and I skipped from low first grade to high second grade in 1 year. Now what that meant was that my reading skills weren't particularly good. So the summer that I was 7 and about to go into the 3rd grade, we had one room at this residence club that, some of you familiar with San Francisco? Kitty corner from Union Square, there was the United Airlines office, I don't know if it's still there, and on the 4th floor was a residence club. The entire floor was a residence club. And it was long-term-ish. There was one of the best storytellers ever, was an African explorer who was staying there for a while, and he shared stories about his explorations of Africa in the 1930s, into the 1940s. And at one point he lost his partner, and he went back and found him, or what was left of him, which was a shrunken head. But I was just fascinated by this. But my task was basically to teach myself to read in that summer. So there was a little study desk. I had a little bell that I rang every day to tell me it was time to go study. Now, my mother had to have made the assignments. My mother had to have looked at the work that I did. I don't remember that. I remember nothing. It wasn't until the 4th grade that we finally had an apartment with 1 bedroom. And we had 1 bedroom only until I entered high school at 14. Sophomore in high school at 14. We didn't have much money. Oftentimes I remember that the only thing that we could eat the last 10 days of every month was pancakes. So we had pancakes for breakfast. I don't remember lunch. Pancakes for dinner. And because of the circumstances that we lived in, sometimes breakfast was cereal with dried milk. Have any of you tried that stuff? It doesn't, I mean, you mix it with water and it's supposed to taste like milk, and it doesn't. So I taught myself to read, and I did well in school. I was in an accelerated ancient history class in the 8th grade. And I loved being in school. I loved learning. Loved history. I loved math. I loved chemistry, physics, biology. Give me a subject and I was enthralled. So I was in this accelerated history class, ancient history class in the 8th grade. And I had to do a report, an oral report, on the Hittites. And I remember being so excited about this. I had the card table set up in the living area, and I was studying, and hours I spent at that. So excited. Gave the talk, got the A in the class. You know what my mother's reaction was? Well, your teacher said you could have gotten an A+. And I tanked. Forget about studying from there on. I don't think in high school I spent more than half an hour a night studying. Still managed to get into advanced physics, which defies me, because I still don't understand how a plane goes aloft. I know the Bernoulli principle. I did get an A in the class when I fast forward, went to college, but it was only because I could explain why all my experiments failed. I was good at math, so I could do the math part, but I have no idea about physics. Anyway, it was interesting because in high school is where I became very involved in 2 things in particular. One was music. The first solo I ever did was at the age of 6. So I've been singing all my life, one way or another. Did a lot of musical comedy. I was professional for a while. And music has really sustained me in my life. The other thing was the theater. And I remember we lived about a mile and a half away from the theater. I don't think my mother ever came to see a performance. I remember walking home at 11 or 1:30 at night. No problem. And the interesting thing about my mother not being in my recollection, I mentioned it when I was 10 and 11, I got to spend time with my grandfather. I couldn't get there by bus, so my mother had to take me. I have no recollection of that. I did learn how to be very responsible and self-reliant very early on. By the age of 8, the summer that I was 8, I took care of a 6-year-old. And we went all over San Francisco. We went ice skating, we went to the Fleischhacker Zoo, we went to the Fleischhacker Pool, which was open at the time. We went to movies. My mother is not my recollection. In high school, I started getting the criticism that you're too intense, you're too passionate, you're too sensitive. It was all about trying to somehow fit in. My mother had a weight issue. I never did. But at a time when you're struggling, your teens are struggling to figure out who you are and what life is all about, I was the one, and I had fully developed by the time I entered senior high school. I was the one wearing fitted straight skirts and form-fitting sweaters, so that people could see that I was not fat. This is when poodle skirts and bulky sweaters were all the rage. But no, I got to go to my biology classes and my physics classes in my tight-fitting clothes. And they weren't obscenely tight, but they showed I had a figure. I had to walk down Jock Road. All the guys lined up on one side of the hallway, just looking at the girls passing by. I wanted to die. But it was the only way I could get to my classes. Those were English classes. Went to college. I didn't need the credits for my senior year. So we left in December of that year. So I was basically out of high school at 16. We went to Germany because my mother had an opportunity to teach overseas with the Department of Defense. So I ended up staying in a pension in Geneva, Switzerland, while she taught in Morocco. And how affectionate was my mother? When I finally saw her after 5 months, she got off the train. I said, "Hi, Mom." And she said, "Hello, Susan." No affection whatsoever at all. She asked if I wanted to fly back to the States to graduate with my class. I thought, what a fine idea. I'll go back to the States. So I ended up renting a room in a large mansion, an old mansion that had been built by a sea captain, with a large family. They had 8 children. Now, it was a separate apartment, or room, a large room, with a separate entrance. So I was renting the room, and as far as my understanding was, I was independent, free to come and go as I wished. Occasionally, I would have dinner with the family and help clean up. That summer when I was 17, my mother's back in the States. We go to a shopping center, and the matriarch of that family happened to be there. So she and my mother chatted for a while. I was already in the car, but they chatted for a while. My mother comes back over and says, "Susan, Mrs. Platt says you don't know how to be a member of a family." Hello? Mom, what kind of family did I have? She never entertained. I take that back. In all the years I was with her, twice. She entertained twice. Once with family. Once with her co-workers. I couldn't exactly have friends living in a boarding house. Couldn't have play dates. Oh, come over and sit in the lobby with me at the hotel. that wasn't going to work. So I didn't learn how, really, to form friendships. I didn't know what friendships were about. I learned nothing about relationships. My mother and I never talked about anything. We talked about nothing. I remember specifically one question that I asked her, and it was, do you believe in God? And her answer was no, but maybe there was something that created all this. It was the only time I asked her a specific question. So, 17, I'm off to college in D.C., American University, for a disastrous year. I fell madly in love. Madly in love. He was perfect. He was tall. He was good looking. He wore an Ivy League suit. He was 5 years older than I. And his parents didn't approve. His father was an admiral at the Pentagon. His mother was a Southern belle, a Southern debutante. And I insulted her because when I went to meet them the first time, I asked if I could help in the kitchen. This is what you do in California. This is not what you do with an upscale family of breeding, because I was implying that you couldn't run her household. So unfortunately, Michael was ultimately given an ultimatum. It's our helping you finish college and your master's degree, or it's Susan. And I was devastated. Michael was devastated. He made the right choice, but we drove around for hours when this ultimatum was delivered. I drove. He had his head on my lap. What are we going to do? How can we fix this? So the first year was a disaster. Academically, too, I failed to drop classes. So I didn't know until I went back to college later that I had been academically dismissed. I didn't care. Sign up for a class and don't show up and the universe will take care of it. Not true. So off to Germany, I was going to go into the Air Force. I took the test, and I was the only woman. There might have been 60 men there. I took the test, and they said, "Oh, can you come back in the afternoon?" Now here are 3 male recruiters. All the men are gone. I'm asked to stay. Why? Well, we want you to take some more tests. So I took the test. And they said, sign on the dotted line. We can get you into OCS at 18 and a half. We're going to get you into OCS. I said, what do you mean I'm 18? I don't have a college degree. There's a special program, OCS at 18 and a half. Well, then Michael called my mother. He found out about it. Called my mother. I don't think Susan should go in the military. Oh, Michael, we're going to get back together somehow. We're going to salvage this. So I went off to Germany instead. I knew that General Electric was hiring. And all I needed to do was take shorthand at 80 words a minute, take notes, and type it, something. Well, I'd taken a typing class, so I could type. So I learned brief forms, got a job with General Electric. Then it really started with my mother. By the way, no, it really started with my mother. She said at some point, Susan, you would do anything you could to embarrass me. What? What could I possibly be doing? She was never telling me. She just walked off. I was working 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day. I was in theater. I was hanging out with a group of us from GE who went dancing, with opera singers, and the rest of the time I was involved in theater. Now, this is the same woman who made that criticism of me. She had a date. A colonel was coming into town, and he had a young lieutenant. And my mother said, why don't you double date. You can be with this young lieutenant, and I'll be with the colonel. I thought, okay, I've never met this young man before in my entire life. So, total strangers sitting at a dinner table, and my mother is making out with the colonel across the table. The young lieutenant and I just looked at each other, and I was absolutely flabbergasted. Flabbergasted. And it wasn't just one kiss. They were all over each other. In public. I asked her one time in my entire life, Mom, I'm really emotionally distressed. It was about Michael, the love of my life. So can we have dinner? I was sitting in the hotel lobby, and she comes up and said, oh, Susan, so-and-so has just come into town. So I'm going to have dinner with him. Can we do this another time? Sure, Mom. And off she went. I never asked her again. She never followed up on it. And that was absolutely it. She also at that time wanted me to call her Ruth. She didn't want people to realize I was more mature and acted more maturely and looked more mature than I was. She looked younger. She didn't want people to know that it was my mother. When I got pregnant, the first words out of her mouth were, don't ever expect me to babysit for you. And she didn't. And it goes on and on. I didn't know until I knew that she was mentally disturbed. I encouraged her to go to a psychologist or a psychiatrist. She did. It was an old family friend. I knew him. She knew him. He died unexpectedly of a heart attack. And her response was, see, I told you there was something wrong with him. Now, the official diagnosis on my mother is functioning paranoid schizophrenic. Functioning because she could hold a job. But paranoid schizophrenic, you bet. You bet. And it wasn't unusual for her to come, show up at my doorstep at 2 o'clock in the morning and say, hi, I'm coming to visit for 2 weeks, 2 months, whatever. And I was always dutiful. I thought about words, about how I feel about her. I knew I didn't like her. At one point, I would say that I loved her because she was my mother. The word respect came up. And then I came across the perfect word about the interaction I had with my mother for her entire life. Deference. I treated her in an appropriate way for someone who was my mother. I was respectful. I was aware of her wishes, etc. I did everything I could to love and support her. How crazy was she? Brand new husband, 1975. She has gone off without telling me where she is, but 1975 I knew. She wouldn't tell me where she was because she was convinced by that time that people were out to destroy her brain. She was convinced by that time that she had information that was going to save the world. They were destroying her brain by bombarding it and destroying the meninges that hold the brain in place. She was convinced of that. So, my 9-year-old daughter, my new husband and I go off to Washington, D.C., where she spends a lot of time at the Library of Congress studying physics. And she's at the Library of Congress because upstairs on the second floor, there are people there who are going to save her life. So one day, while we were there, she said, they're going to evacuate me tomorrow. Who's going to evacuate you? Well, the people at the Library of Congress who are keeping me alive. And by this time she was sleeping with a rubber mat around her head. So, deferentially, respectful, we took her and her 2 suitcases to the Library of Congress. She started up on the stairs and turned around and said, now in case something goes wrong, Susan, drive by at about 5 o'clock. Guess who was there at 5 o'clock with her 2 suitcases because the plan had gone asunder. She eventually pulled it together enough so that She went back to teaching, and as I said, she was an extremely good teacher. Extremely good. But she, if there was something she could criticize me for, she did, one way or another. And sometimes it was just simply a look, sometimes it was by saying absolutely nothing, not even looking at me. But someone pointed out in my 40s that I had been trying all my life to get the vote of someone whose vote didn't count. I was trying to get the approval of someone whose opinion didn't matter. In my 50s, and this was after she had passed, I cried, I wept. She had already transitioned. I wept for the mother, not the mother I had, but the mother I never did have and never would have. And I remember being angry at that time, and I said out loud as I wept with these tears, "Mom, I could have been a contender." Now, I never saw that movie. It's an old movie about a boxer who loses on purpose. But Mom, I could have been a contender. And then I got over that, because I never blamed her. I realized early on that I was responsible for my life. Now, are there hidden scars in there? Yes, there are. And sometimes they erupt and come to the surface when I least expect it. I was criticized recently for my singing. And it was done in public. And the person said, "You're singing flat," then added, "You probably always have, and no one bothered to tell you." Well, you don't do what I did, and the success that I had, if that's the case. But by gosh, she ripped open that mother wound, and it's taken me 6 weeks. I'm finally saying, okay, it's life. It doesn't matter where you start. It doesn't matter where you end up. It's a matter of the direction we're going in our lives. That's what matters. We have the capacity to grow and to learn and to get better, to heal at every moment of every single day. So I take full responsibility for who I am. And am I perfect? Absolutely not. How many of you saw the movie, The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel? What a great movie. Before I tell you the punchline on this and why I mention it, one of the things I mentioned is that I don't handle anger well. I let things build up until I explode like Vesuvius. And it's not pretty to see, and it's way out of proportion to what the trigger has been. There's only one time I was so angry, I don't remember what I said. I was a tour director for a long time. My driver and I needed to get a 45-foot coach off of Post Street onto Powell Street at Union Square. Yeah? So you swing wide on well, it was tricky, but on a Saturday, a taxi had tried to come in on the right-hand side. Yes, as we're coming back in. And the taxi ended up on the sidewalk. The whole taxi was on the sidewalk. Taxi driver got out, said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, it was my fault." Everything was fine. No serious damage done to either vehicle. But the incident happened. The next day, we had to make the same turn. Luckily, there were no passengers on board. We were making the same turn. And I am looking like a hawk at that rear view mirror because of the incident the day before. And so help me, a car tries to do the same thing. No damage to the car. But there was a bit of contact. Yes, the driver gets in his car, pulls in front of our coach, our 45-foot coach, on Powell Street, comes up, my driver, who was just mellow, opened the door, and the man started yelling that he wasn't going to move the car until the police came and a full report, and how dare the driver. And I was up out of my seat in a flash. And I remember pointing at the rearview mirror. I remember pointing at the corner. I have no idea what I said, but the man just backed off, got in his car, and drove away. I subsequently, not in the moment, but later I asked the driver, what did I say? He said, Susan, you don't want to know. Anyway, he never would. I worked with him for another 4 years. And every year or so I'd say, what did I say? The best exotic Marigold Hotel. The line that I loved in there was the manager said, it will all be perfect in the end. And if it isn't perfect, it's not the end. So, celebrating Mother's Day, absolutely. I'm alive and I wouldn't trade this life for anything. With its hills and its valleys and its mountains and its abysses, I wouldn't trade it for anything. And every time I start to sink a little bit, come off my center, the center of who I truly am, I remember my grandfather, my nurturer, the one who loved and cared about me. As did my father when I finally got to know him. And I am thankful for them for providing me with the grounding so that I could become who I'm in the process of becoming. Happy Mother's Day.
We have time for like 1 or 2 questions. I'm getting a...
Oh
Uh-oh. I'll move away from you
yeah.
while you answer this.
I should say that Susan and I have had a few lunches together, and so I know some of the story, but that was a hell of a tour de force. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Really incredible. The question I have is, had your mother been more stereotypically loving and sweet and kind and normal, what would you have been like?
Ah, ha, ha. Who knows? Who knows? I have absolutely no clue, and that really is a great question. Had she not said in the 8th grade what she said, my original plan was to become a doctor. I found out later, I returned to school umpteen times, and I found out later that I wasn't suited to be a doctor. I am great in an emergency, a medical emergency. I am great with that. But if I see it from the outside, looking in as an observer, I really don't have the heart for it, I don't have the stomach for it, because I'm too involved. I'm too involved. So other than that, I have no clue.
If you'll stand and ask your question, and we'll take yours as the last question.
What was your grandmother like, and what was your mother's sisters or brothers like? Did they have the same sort of issues?
No, they didn't. I called when this incident in D.C., I was extremely concerned about her. Luckily, fortunate, 2 of her psychiatrists ended up calling me, and one of them stayed in touch with me for a number of years. The only way to break through to her was to put her in a padded cell and try to break through the delusions that she had, and there were many by that time. She was alienated. My maternal grandmother was quite a strong character. She was very active in the Democratic Party. She had very strong opinions about everything. My grandfather was 50 when he married her. She was a 35-year-old spinster teacher in Alaska. You're not a spinster teacher in Alaska. If you are soft and loving and compliant. So they quickly produced 2 children, and that was the end of the marriage. I mean, they stayed together until my mother was 8 and they came down to Alaska. But She was an iron horse is the best I can describe her.
I want to ask you a question because, first, obviously, your mother had a major impact, even if you don't remember her.
Oh,
she had a major impact.
Absolutely.
But you didn't mention yourself as a mother, and you did say you had kids. So, what lessons did you learn, or what mothering skills did you learn as a result of all that impact from your own mother?
Okay, bottom line, I have to say that at this point my relationship with my daughter is so fractured that it will probably not be repaired in this lifetime. Number of things. Was I a great mother? No, I wasn't. Made huge mistakes. However, the significant difference is that I always let her know how much I loved her. And still do. I have chosen not to be a part of her life at this point. There's a great deal of drama. She also has mental issues. She also is struggling with alcohol. And the last time I saw her in September, and I had not seen her for 3 or 4 years, it was good for about 5 hours. And I physically don't feel safe in the same room with her. And I surround her with love. Could I ask her to come down and visit me here? I don't trust her. She has blasted me on Facebook. And then she'll apologize. She has a brain anomaly, left brain anomaly. The left side of her brain is organically underdeveloped, so it functions at about 34, 33%. Right side of her brain is off the charts, so she tests out as gifted, but logic, rational thinking, impulse control, things like that are all compromised. And then it's complicated by these other things. She was a brilliant and a nationally recognized figure skating coach. And gorgeous in that, when she was in that element. And she's not in that element, she would. Was about 100 pounds overweight at this point. And I surround her with love. From a distance. So, but I always, every single day, I let her know how much I loved her. So she did get that. Yes. Thank you so much. You're so welcome.
Oh, thank you, everybody. Happy Mother's Day again. Please, you can turn on your cell phones if you'd like. Please stack your chairs and pick up your coffee cups. And if you would take your conversations outside, we can all leave sooner. Thank you.